The wind cut through his thin jacket like a knife. It was the kind of cold that got into your bones and stayed there, the kind that made you forget what warmth even felt like. Pulled his sleeves down over his hands and kept walking, his eyes fixed on the sidewalk in front of him. He was 15 years old, though most people thought he was younger. 2 years on the streets had made him thin and small. His clothes hung loose on his frame, and his shoes had holes that let the rain in. But it was his eyes that really showed what he had been through. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much, lost too much, and learned to expect nothing from anyone. Had not always been this way. There was a time when his life looked completely different, a time when he had a home, a family, and a future that seemed bright and full of possibility. But that time felt like a dream now, something that had happened to another boy in another life. His mother had been a music teacher. She gave piano lessons to kids in their neighborhood, and their small apartment was always filled with the sound of scales and simple melodies. Remembered sitting on the floor as a little boy, listening to her play. She had a way of making the piano sing, of pulling emotions out of the keys that he could not put into words. When he was 4 years old, his mother noticed something. He would sit at the piano after her students left and pick out the melodies they had been practicing. Not just random notes, but the actual songs played correctly from memory. She tested him with harder pieces, and he learned them just as fast. By the time he was 6, he was better than most of her adult students. His mother cried the first time she heard him play a full classical piece without a single mistake. She held his face in her hands and told him he had a gift, a real gift, something special that not everyone gets. She said it was his job to share that gift with the world. His father worked long hours at a factory to pay the bills. He did not know much about music, but he knew his son was talented. He would come home tired and sit in the old armchair, close his eyes, and listen to practice. Sometimes would catch him wiping his eyes when he thought no one was looking. They were not rich. They never had extra money for fancy things, but they were happy. They had each other, and they had the music that filled their home every single day. By the time he was 10, he was winning competitions. Local ones at first, then state level. Teachers and judges would shake their heads in disbelief when they heard him play. One judge told his mother that was the most naturally gifted young pianist she had seen in 30 years. When he was 12, he got a full scholarship to a famous music school in the city. His parents cried again that day, this time from pure joy. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly how it was supposed to be. And then in one terrible moment, everything was gone. It happened on a rainy night in October. His parents were driving home from his school concert. He had stayed behind with a teacher to help pack up the equipment. The roads were wet and slick. A truck driver fell asleep at the wheel and crossed into the wrong lane. The police said his parents probably never even saw it coming. Remembered the moment he found out. He remembered the way the principal's face looked when she pulled him aside. He remembered the sound of his own voice asking questions that no one could answer. He remembered thinking that this must be some kind of mistake, that his mom and dad would walk through the door any minute and tell him it was all a bad dream. But they never did. What followed was a blur of strangers and paperwork and social workers who spoke to him in soft voices. He had no other family, no aunts or uncles, no grandparents still living. He was placed in foster care, moved from one home to another. Some of the families were kind, others were not. None of them felt like home. At his third foster home, things got bad, really bad. Did not like to think about what happened there. All that mattered was that one night, he packed his few belongings into a backpack and climbed out the window. He was 13 years old, and he decided that being alone on the streets was better than being trapped in that house. 2 years had passed since then. 2 years of sleeping in shelters when he could find space, and in doorways when he could not. 2 years of learning which restaurants threw out food at which times, and which parts of town were safe to walk through after dark. 2 years of being invisible. That was the hardest part. Not the hunger, not the cold, not even the fear. It was the way people looked through him like he was not even there, like he was part of the sidewalk, something to step around and forget about. He had become a ghost, haunting a city that did not want to see him. Had not touched a piano in 2 years. At first, the thought of playing made him feel sick. The music was too connected to his mother, to the life he had lost. Later, when the pain had dulled into something he could carry, there was simply no opportunity. Homeless kids did not get invited to sit at grand pianos. Sometimes at night, when he could not sleep, he would hold his hands up in the darkness and move his fingers the way he used to when he played. He could still hear the music in his head, every note perfect and clear. But it was just memory now, just echoes of who he used to be. On this particular October afternoon, the wind was getting worse. Had been walking for hours, trying to stay warm, but he could feel his body starting to shut down. His fingers were numb. His feet ached. He needed to get inside somewhere, anywhere, just for a few minutes. That is when he saw the hotel. It was one of those fancy places downtown, with glass doors and a uniformed doorman and people in expensive coats coming and going. The kind of place that would normally avoid because security guards took one look at him and told him to move along. But today, he was too cold to care. He waited until the doorman was helping someone with their luggage, and he slipped inside. The warmth hit him like a wave. He stood just inside the entrance, letting the heat sink into his frozen skin, expecting any second to feel a hand on his shoulder telling him to leave. But the lobby was busy. People were rushing around, talking on phones, pulling suitcases. Nobody noticed one skinny kid in old clothes standing by the door. Let out a breath and took a few steps further inside. The lobby was beautiful, all marble floors and high ceilings and golden light. It was like another world, a world where people did not worry about where their next meal would come from. And then he saw it. In the far corner of the lobby, away from the front desk and the seating areas, there was a piano. A grand piano, black and shining, looking like something out of a concert hall. It sat on a small raised platform with velvet ropes around it and a little sign that could not read from where he stood. His heart stopped. For a long moment he just stared at it, the curve of the body, the way the lid was propped open, the perfect row of black and white keys waiting in silence. Something stirred inside him, something he thought had died a long time ago. Without even realizing he was moving, took a step toward the piano, then another. His eyes never left those keys. He did not know what was going to happen next. He did not have a plan. All he knew was that for the first time in 2 years, he felt something other than cold. He felt alive. Stood frozen in the middle of that grand hotel lobby, his eyes locked on the piano. People moved around him like water flowing past a stone, but he did not notice them. He did not notice anything except those black and white keys gleaming under the soft lights. His feet carried him closer without permission. It was like the piano was pulling him forward, calling to something deep inside that he had buried for 2 years. He stopped just outside the velvet ropes and read the small brass sign attached to the stand. Please do not touch, display only. Display only. The words felt wrong somehow. A piano was not meant to sit silent behind ropes like a painting on a wall. A piano was meant to be played, to fill rooms with sound, to make people feel things they could not put into words. His mother had taught him that. Stood there for a long time, just looking. He studied the keys, counting them in his head even though he already knew there were 88. He looked at the pedals, the bench, the way the lid was propped open at just the right angle. It was He could tell from the shape and the way the name was written in gold letters above the keys. His mother used to say that playing was like having a conversation with an old friend. He wondered how long it had been since anyone had played this one. The lobby continued to buzz with activity around him. Guests checked in at the front desk. Bellhops pushed carts loaded with expensive luggage. Everyone seemed to be in a hurry, Everyone seemed to have somewhere important to be. Nobody paid any attention to the thin boy in the worn jacket standing by the roped-off piano. Nobody except a group of men sitting in leather chairs near the lobby bar. There were 4 of them, all wearing suits that probably cost more than's father had made in a month. They had drinks in their hands and that loud, confident way of talking that some people get when they have money and want everyone to know it. Had learned to spot people like them. They were the ones who looked at homeless kids with disgust, like poverty was a disease they might catch. One of them, a heavy man with a red face and a gold watch, noticed first. He nudged the man next to him and nodded in its direction. Soon all 4 of them were looking, and could feel their eyes on him like something dirty. "Hey, check out the kid," the red-faced man said. He did not bother to lower his voice. "Looks like a stray wandered in from the street." The others laughed. It was an ugly sound, the kind of laughter that was not really about something being funny. "Security's getting slow around here," another man said. He was tall and thin with gray hair and a smile that did not reach his eyes. They used to keep the riffraff out. His face burned. He wanted to turn and walk away, to slip back out into the cold and disappear like he always did. That was the smart thing to do. That was what he had learned to do over the past 2 years. Do not make trouble. Do not draw attention. Stay invisible. But something held him in place. Maybe it was the way they were looking at him, like he was less than human. Maybe it was all the times he had been pushed aside, ignored, and forgotten. Maybe it was the piano sitting right there, so close he could almost touch it. "Look at him staring at that piano," the red-faced man said, louder now. He wanted to hear. He wanted everyone to hear. "Hey kid, you know what that is? That's called a piano. Probably costs more than you'll ever see in your whole life." More laughter from the group. A few other people in the lobby glanced over, then quickly looked away. Nobody said anything. Nobody told the men to stop. His hands were shaking, not from cold this time, from something else. Something that had been building inside him for 2 years, pressed down and locked away, now pushing to get out. "Maybe he thinks he can play it," the thin man with gray hair said. "Is that it, kid? You think you're some kind of musician?" The red-faced man nearly choked on his drink, laughing. "Oh, that's rich. Go ahead then, kid. Show us what you got. Bet you don't even know which end to sit at." They kept laughing. Stood there, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He thought about his mother. He thought about all those hours sitting beside her on the piano bench, learning to make music that could move people to tears. He thought about who he used to be before the world took everything away. And something inside him snapped. Not in a bad way, not in an angry way. It was more like a wall coming down, a door flying open. All the pain and loss and loneliness that he had been carrying suddenly had somewhere to go. Before he knew what he was doing, ducked under the velvet rope. "Hey," someone shouted. He heard footsteps behind him, heavy and fast. Security had finally noticed him, but did not stop. He walked straight to the piano bench and sat down. The security guard was a big man with a shaved head and a name tag that said Ray. He was maybe 10 feet away when lifted the cover off the keys. Ray slowed down, confused. This was not how these situations usually went. Homeless kids who snuck into the hotel usually ran when they got caught. They did not sit down at the display piano like they owned the place. "Kid, you need to get up," Ray said. His voice was firm but not mean. "That piano's not for playing, you gotta go." Did not answer. He placed his fingers on the keys. They were cool and smooth, and the feeling sent a shock through his whole body. It had been so long, so incredibly long. The lobby had gone quiet. The businessmen had stopped laughing. Everyone was watching now, waiting to see what this dirty homeless kid could possibly be thinking. Closed his eyes, he took a deep breath, and then he began to play. The first note rang out pure and clear, cutting through the silence like a bell. Then came the second, the third, building into something that made Ray stop in his tracks. It was Chopin, Ballade number 1 in G minor, one of the most difficult pieces ever written for piano and also one of the most beautiful. His mother had been teaching it to him in the weeks before the accident. He had never performed it for anyone. He had not even finished learning it when she died. But somehow, in this moment, his fingers knew exactly where to go. The music filled the lobby like something alive. It was soft at first, gentle and sad, like the memory of something precious that was lost. Then it grew stronger, more powerful, sweeping through the room in waves that seemed to touch everyone who heard it. Ray stood frozen, his mouth hanging open. He had seen a lot of things working hotel security, but nothing like this, nothing even close to this. The red-faced businessman had put down his drink. His expression had changed completely. The smugness was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like shame. The other men in his group were equally silent, their laughter forgotten. A woman walking toward the elevator stopped and pressed her hand to her chest. An elderly couple near the front desk turned around, their eyes wide. Even the staff behind the counter had stopped what they were doing to listen. Did not see any of them. His eyes were still closed. He was somewhere else now, somewhere far from the cold streets and the hunger and the loneliness. He was back in that small apartment with his mother beside him, her voice guiding him through the difficult passages, her perfume in the air, her love surrounding him like a warm blanket. He played for her, every note was for her. And as the music grew and swelled and filled every corner of that grand hotel lobby, something incredible began to happen. People started to cry. Not just one or two people. All over the lobby, guests and staff alike were wiping their eyes, caught off guard by emotions they had not expected to feel. The music was doing something to them, reaching inside and touching places they kept hidden from the world. Ray, the security guard, blinked hard and looked away for a moment. He had a son at home, about the same age as this kid. He could not imagine his boy out on the streets, alone and forgotten. He could not imagine what this kid must have been through. The red-faced businessman was not laughing anymore. His eyes were wet, and he was staring at like he was seeing him for the first time, really seeing him. The music continued to pour out, beautiful and heartbreaking and completely unstoppable, played like his life depended on it because, in a way, it did. This was all he had left. This gift his mother had given him. This voice that the world had tried to silence. And now, finally, everyone was listening. The music poured from the piano like water breaking through a dam. It filled every corner of the hotel lobby, rising up to the high ceilings and wrapping around everyone who stood there watching. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody could look away from the thin boy with the worn clothes whose fingers danced across the keys like they were born to do nothing else. Played with his eyes closed, lost somewhere deep inside the music. His body swayed gently with the melody, leaning into the powerful parts and pulling back during the quiet moments. It was not just playing. It was more like breathing, like the piano had become part of him and the notes were coming straight from his heart. The piece moved through its different moods like a story being told without words. There was sadness in it, deep and heavy. There was longing, the kind that aches in your chest when you miss someone so much it hurts to breathe. But there was also beauty, the kind that makes you realize how precious life is, even when it breaks you. Ray, the security guard, had not moved from where he stood. His hand had been reaching for his radio to call for backup, but now it just hung at his side, forgotten. He was a practical man. He had worked in security for 15 years and thought he had seen everything. But this was something else entirely. This was something that did not make sense. How could a homeless kid play like this? How could someone so young, so beaten down by life, create sounds that seemed to come from another world? Ray thought about his own son again. The boy was always on his phone, always complaining about being bored. He had everything he could want and still walked around like life owed him more. But this kid in front of him had nothing. Nothing except whatever was happening right now between his fingers and those piano keys. On the other side of the lobby, the group of businessmen sat in complete silence. The red-faced man who had been so loud and cruel just minutes ago looked like a different person now. His shoulders had slumped. His eyes were fixed on with an expression that was hard to read. Maybe it was shame. Maybe it was wonder. Maybe it was both. The tall man with gray hair beside him was not smiling anymore. He was thinking about his own childhood, about piano lessons his mother had forced him to take. He had quit after 2 years because he thought it was boring. He had never been good at it anyway, but listening to this boy play made him wish he had tried harder, made him wish he had understood what music could really be. A woman in an expensive dress had stopped near the elevator. She had been on her way to a business meeting, running late, her mind full of numbers and deadlines. Now none of that seemed to matter. Tears were running down her face, and she did not even try to wipe them away. The music had found something inside her that she had kept locked up for years. Memories of her father, who had passed away last spring. The way he used to hum old songs while he cooked dinner. The sound of his laugh that she would never hear again. She was not the only one crying. All across the lobby, people were quietly breaking down. A young couple held hands, leaning into each other. An older man in a business suit had taken off his glasses to press his fingers against his eyes. Even some of the hotel staff behind the front desk were dabbing at their faces with tissues. The music did not care who you were. It did not care if you were rich or poor, young or old, happy or sad. It reached inside everyone the same way, touching the places where people keep their deepest feelings hidden. Upstairs in her office, the hotel manager was finishing up some paperwork when she heard something strange. At first she thought it was the speaker system, maybe someone playing music in the lobby for some event she had forgotten about. But this did not sound like recorded music. This sounded live. This sounded real. She put down her pen and listened more carefully. The notes floated up through the floor, muffled but still beautiful. Whatever was happening down there, it was not normal. She stood up and walked to the door. Her name was, and she had been running this hotel for almost 8 years. She knew every inch of the building, every employee, every policy. And she knew for certain that nobody was supposed to be playing that piano. It was a display piece, worth more than most cars. Guests were absolutely not allowed to touch it. She hurried down the stairs, expecting to find some kind of problem. A drunk guest, maybe, or someone who had ignored the signs. She was already preparing the polite but firm words she would use to end the situation. But when she stepped into the lobby and saw what was actually happening, she stopped cold. A boy, a child really, who could not have been more than 15 or 16. He was sitting with his back to her, his whole body moving with the music. His clothes were old and dirty. His hair was messy and unwashed. He looked like he had not had a proper meal in weeks. And he was playing like an angel. Felt her breath catch in her throat. She had grown up with music. Her grandmother had been a piano teacher in Taiwan and had spent countless hours as a little girl sitting beside her, learning folk songs and classical pieces. She knew good playing when she heard it. This was not just good, this was extraordinary. She took a few steps closer, moving slowly, not wanting to disturb whatever was happening. That was when she noticed the tears. Not just 1 or 2 people, but almost everyone in the lobby. Grown men and women, standing or sitting, all of them crying as they listened to this homeless boy pour his soul into an instrument he was not even supposed to touch. Felt her own eyes begin to sting. The music was doing something to her too. It was pulling up memories she had not thought about in years. Her grandmother's hands on the keys, wrinkled and gentle. The smell of jasmine tea in her grandmother's small apartment. The feeling of being loved completely, without conditions, without limits. Her grandmother had been gone for almost 20 years now, but in this moment, listening to this boy play, felt her presence again, like she was standing right there beside her. The piece was building towards something. The notes grew more intense, more complicated. the melody weaving in and out of darker harmonies. His fingers flew across the keys with impossible speed and precision. Sweat had begun to form on his forehead, but he did not slow down. He could not slow down. The music had taken over completely. And then slowly the storm began to calm. The crashing waves of sound softened into something gentle and quiet. The melody returned, but different now. Sadder, more fragile, like a voice saying goodbye. Thought about his mother as he played these final passages. He thought about the last time he saw her, waving from the car window as she and his father drove away. He thought about all the things he never got to tell her, how much he loved her, how grateful he was for everything she taught him, how sorry he was that he never got the chance to make her proud. The last few notes hung in the air like questions without answers. Then, finally, silence. His hands rested on the keys. His eyes were still closed. He could feel tears on his own face now, warm and wet, but he did not move to wipe them away. For a long moment, nobody in the lobby made a sound. It was like the whole world had stopped, holding its breath, not wanting to break the spell. Then, from somewhere in the back, someone started to clap. It spread quickly. One person, then 5, then 20. Within seconds, the entire lobby had erupted into applause. Not polite applause, the kind you give at the end of a boring speech. Real applause. The kind that comes from deep in your chest when you have just witnessed something you will never forget. Finally opened his eyes. He turned around slowly on the bench, and for the first time he saw all the people looking at him. He saw their tears, their smiles, their hands coming together over and over. He did not know what to do. He did not know what to say. He had expected to be dragged out of the hotel and thrown back into the cold. He had expected anger, maybe even trouble with the police. He had not expected this. He had not expected any of this. The applause kept going. It echoed off the marble walls and the high ceiling, filling the lobby with a sound that had not heard in years. He sat on the piano bench, frozen, unable to process what was happening around him. People were standing up from their seats. Some were still wiping tears from their faces. Others were shaking their heads in disbelief, turning to whoever stood next to them to ask if that had really just happened. A few guests had pulled out their phones and were recording, though most had been too caught up in the moment to think about capturing it. Did not know what to do with his hands. He folded them in his lap, then unfolded them, then gripped the edge of the bench. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. Part of him wanted to run. That was his instinct now, the thing 2 years on the streets had taught him. When people noticed you, it usually meant trouble. But nobody looked angry. Nobody was yelling at him to get out. They were smiling. They were clapping. Some of them were looking at him like he was something special. He had almost forgotten what that felt like. The red-faced businessman was the first one from his group to stand up. He moved slowly, like a man walking through a dream. The arrogance that had filled him just 15 minutes ago was completely gone. In its place was something that looked almost like pain. He walked toward the piano and felt his body tense. This was it. This was where the man would grab him, call him names again, demand that security throw him out, prepared himself for the worst. But the man stopped a few feet away and just stood there. His eyes were red and wet. His hands hung at his sides, helpless. For a long moment, he did not say anything at all. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he spoke. "I'm sorry." Blinked. He was not sure he had heard correctly. "I'm sorry," the man said again, louder this time. "What I said before, the things I called you, the way I laughed, that was wrong. I was wrong." He paused, struggling to find words. "I don't know where you came from or what you've been through, but that was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in my life, and I almost missed it because I was too busy being cruel." Did not know how to respond. Nobody had ever apologized to him like this before, not once in 2 years. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The other businessmen had gathered behind their friend. They looked uncomfortable, ashamed. One by one, they mumbled their own apologies. The tall man with gray hair pressed some folded bills into his hand before he could refuse. It was more money than had seen in months. "Get yourself something to eat," the man said quietly. "Please." Ray, the security guard, had finally moved from his spot. He approached the piano slowly, his eyes still wide with shock. When he reached, he did not say anything about rules or policies or having to leave. Instead, he put a hand on the boy's shoulder and squeezed gently. "That was something else, kid," Ray said. His voice was thick. "That was really something else." Looked up at him and managed a small nod. He still could not find words. Everything was happening too fast, and his brain could not keep up. That was when stepped forward. She had been watching everything from near the staircase, taking it all in. The performance, the tears, the apologies, the way this homeless boy had walked into her hotel and turned the whole lobby upside down with nothing but his 2 hands and an old piano. She had made a decision. She was not sure yet exactly what it would mean or how it would work, but she knew she could not let this boy walk back out into the cold and disappear. "Excuse me," she said, moving through the small crowd that had gathered around the piano. People stepped aside when they saw who she was. Everyone who worked at the hotel knew. She had a reputation for being fair but firm, the kind of boss who did not tolerate excuses but would also fight for her employees when they needed it. Looked up at her and immediately assumed she was there to punish him. She was dressed in a nice suit, carried herself with authority, and had that look of someone in charge. He started to stand, ready to be escorted out. "Please," said, holding up a hand. "Stay, I'm not here to kick you out." Hesitated, then slowly sat back down. Pulled over a chair from a nearby table and sat down facing him. Up close, she could see just how young he really was. Just a child. A child with dirt under his fingernails and holes in his shoes, and the kind of tired in his eyes that no kid should ever have. "What's your name?" she asked gently. She repeated it like she was committing it to memory. "That was Chopin you were playing, Ballade number 1. Nodded, surprised that she recognized it. "I grew up with that piece," said. "My grandmother used to play it. She was a piano teacher back in Taiwan. I never got very good myself, but I know what it's supposed to sound like." She paused. "You play it better than anyone I've ever heard, and I mean that." Did not know what to say. Compliments felt strange, like clothes that did not fit right. "Where did you learn?" asked. "My mom." The word came out rough, scratchy. "She taught me. She was a music teacher." "Was?" Looked down at his hands. "She died, her and my dad both, car accident 3 years ago." Felt her heart crack. She had suspected something like this, but hearing it out loud made it real. This boy had lost everything. His parents, his home, his future. And somehow, through all of that, he had held onto this incredible gift. "Do you have anyone?" she asked. "Any family, anywhere to stay?" Shook his head slowly. "I was in foster care for a while. It didn't work out. Been on my own for about 2 years now." 2 years. Thought about her own children, safe at home, complaining about homework and chores. She thought about what it would take to survive on the streets for 2 years at such a young age. The hunger, the fear, the loneliness that must feel endless. She said, leaning forward slightly, "I want to help you. I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but I'm not going to let you walk out of here and go back to sleeping on the streets. Not after what I just saw. Not after what everyone in this lobby just felt." Stared at her. He had heard promises before. Social workers who said they would find him a good home. Foster parents who said they would treat him like their own. None of those promises had meant anything in the end. But there was something different in this woman's eyes, something real. "Why?" he asked. It was the only word he could manage. Thought about the question. She thought about her grandmother, about the music that had filled her childhood, about all the times she had wished she could give back some of the gifts the world had given her. "Because everyone deserves a chance," she said simply. and I think you've been waiting for yours long enough." She stood up and held out her hand. "Come with me. Let's get you something to eat, some clean clothes, and figure out the rest from there, one step at a time." Looked at her hand for a long moment. His whole body was shaking, but not from cold. Not this time. This time it was something else, something that felt dangerously close to hope. He had learned not to trust hope. Hope was what hurt you when things fell apart. Hope was the thing that made the disappointment worse. But sitting there in that hotel lobby, surrounded by strangers who had cried at his music, and a woman who was offering him a chance he did not deserve, made a choice. He reached out and took her hand. And for the first time in 2 years, he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. 6 months can change everything. Learned that truth in ways he never could have imagined on that cold October day when he ducked under a velvet rope and sat down at a piano he was not supposed to touch. He stood backstage now at the city's biggest concert hall, wearing a black suit that fit him perfectly. His hair was clean and neatly cut. His shoes were new without a single hole. He had gained weight in the past 6 months, filling out the way a growing teenager should. But it was his eyes that had changed the most. They still carried shadows of everything he had been through, but there was light in them now. Real light. Through a gap in the curtain, he could see the audience filing into their seats. 2,000 people, maybe more. The tickets had sold out in less than a week. He still could not believe it. Everything had happened so fast after that day in the hotel lobby, had kept her word. She got him a hot meal that first night, then a room in the hotel while she figured out the next steps. She made phone calls, filled out paperwork, and fought through a system that did not make helping people easy. It turned out that was more than just a hotel manager. She sat on the board of a foundation that helped young people in the arts. She knew people, important people, and she was not afraid to ask them for help. Within 2 weeks, had a real place to stay. A small apartment near his home, paid for by the foundation while his situation got sorted out. He had clothes that fit, food in the refrigerator, a bed with clean sheets that he could not stop touching because he had forgotten how soft they could be. But the biggest gift came 3 weeks after that day in the hotel. Showed up at his apartment with a woman named Mrs., a retired piano teacher who had once trained some of the best musicians in the country. She was in her 70s now, with white hair and kind eyes and hands that still moved like water over the keys. Mrs. listened to play for about 30 seconds before she turned to with tears in her eyes. "Where has this boy been hiding?" she asked. After that, life became a blur of lessons and practice, and people who actually believed in him. Mrs. pushed him harder than anyone ever had, but she did it with love. She saw something in him that he had stopped seeing in himself, and she refused to let him give up on it. The concert tonight was her idea. She had connections with the symphony, and she had called in every favor she had to make this happen. A showcase for young talent, with as the headline performer. The boy who had been homeless 6 months ago would now play for an audience of thousands. Standing backstage, felt his hands start to shake. He pressed them flat against his legs and took a deep breath. He had played for crowds before, back when he was a kid competing in those small-town competitions. But this was different. This was bigger than anything he had ever done. He felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to find standing behind him. "How are you feeling?" she asked. Managed a small smile, terrified. Laughed softly. "Good, that means you care." She squeezed his shoulder. "You're ready for this. You've been ready your whole life. You just needed someone to remind you." Nodded, but his throat was too tight to speak. "There's something I want to show you," said. She led him to a spot where he could see into the audience without being seen. "Third row, center section," she said, pointing. Looked. It took him a moment, but then he saw him. Ray, the security guard from the hotel. He was sitting there in a suit that looked a little too big, like he had borrowed it for the occasion. His wife sat next to him, and on his other side was a teenage boy who must have been his son. Ray was looking around the concert hall with wide eyes, like he could not believe he was really there. "I invited him," said. "He's been asking about you ever since that day, wanted to know if you were okay." Felt something warm spread through his chest. "And over there," continued, pointing to a section on the right side, "fifth row." Looked again, his breath caught. It was the businessman, the red-faced man who had mocked him in the hotel lobby. He was sitting quietly with his hands folded, staring at the empty stage. He looked different somehow, softer, like the past 6 months had changed him too. "He donated $50,000 to the foundation's music program," said quietly. "Said he wanted to make sure no kid with talent ever got overlooked again. He asked to come tonight. I thought you should know." Did not know what to say. The man who had laughed at him, who had called him a stray, was now sitting in the audience waiting to hear him play, not out of guilt, out of belief. People really could change, was proof of that himself. A stagehand appeared and told them it was almost time. Gave one last hug, holding him tight like a mother would. "Your parents would be so proud of you," she whispered. "I know I am." Then she was gone, heading to her seat, and was alone with the biggest moment of his life waiting just beyond the curtain. He closed his eyes and thought about his mother. He pictured her face, the way she smiled when he played something new, the way she clapped even when he made mistakes. He could almost hear her voice telling him that the music was a gift, and gifts were meant to be shared. He was not alone. He understood that now. His mother was with him in every note he played, in every piece of music she had taught him. She would always be with him. The announcer's voice echoed through the hall, introducing him. There was applause, polite and expectant. 2,000 people waiting to see what this kid could do. Walked out onto the stage. The lights were bright, and for a moment he could not see anything except the glow. Then his eyes adjusted and the audience came into focus. Rows and rows of faces, all looking at him. He saw Ray in the third row, grinning and giving him a thumbs up. He saw the businessman nodding slightly, his expression serious but kind. He saw her hands pressed together like she was praying. Sat down at the grand piano. It was just like the one in the hotel, just like the one his mother used to dream about owning someday. He placed his fingers on the keys. The hall went silent. And then he began to play. The music that filled the concert hall that night was unlike anything the audience had ever heard. It was full of pain and loss, but also hope and survival. It told the story of a boy who had lost everything and found his way back through the only thing that never left him. By the end of the first piece, people were crying. By the end of the second, they were on their feet. When played the final note of his last piece, the Chopin ballade he had played in the hotel lobby 6 months ago, the applause was so loud it seemed to shake the walls. Stood and bowed, tears streaming down his face. He looked out at the crowd, at all these people who had come to hear him play, and he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt like he belonged. Later that night, after the photos and the handshakes, and the people telling him he had a brilliant future ahead of him, stood outside the concert hall and looked up at the stars. He thought about how far he had come, from sleeping in doorways to standing on the biggest stage in the city, from being invisible to being seen. He thought about his mother and father, and he hoped that somehow, wherever they were, they had heard him play tonight. And he thought about the cold October day when he had walked into a hotel lobby with nothing but a worn jacket and a broken heart. He had not expected much that day. None of them had. But sometimes life surprises you. Sometimes the music finds a way. And sometimes a homeless boy sits down at a piano and changes everything.